It's a beautiful Monday morning. Good morning and welcome to Early Exchange, where we'll discuss everything that has to do with business, finance, and the economy. I am Femi Ayodele. Today's program is going to be very educative. We're set to inform you, to entertain you, to enlighten you, as we always do. And we hope that as we spend the next 3 hours with us, you will enjoy the best of programming. The train is set, and now we are set for news update. Let's go on a short break and we'll kick off with news update, where Blessing will come to take us around the world.
Good morning and welcome to the morning news update. I am Blessing AJ. I will be bringing you up to speed on the latest development, and that will begin with stories from Nigeria. In a bid to enhance the financial stability of those in the education sector and improve the quality of education in the country, President Bola Tinubu has approved the implementation of 35 and 23% salary increase for staff of all federal institutions in the country. This was conveyed in a letter signed by the Chief Executive Officer of the Salaries, Income and Wages Commission, Ekpo Yu Unta. The letter notified various government offices, including the Office of the Chief of Staff to the President and Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, about the salary increase. The circular noted that the Presidential Committee on Salaries approved these revisions, taking into consideration collective bargaining processes and the 2023 budget provisions. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration has obtained approval for a fresh 535.6 billion naira loan from the World Bank, according to an official message released on the official website of the World Bank. The loan will provide additional funding for the ongoing Adolescent Girls Initiative for Learning and Empowerment project, and the project will expand from the current 7 states to an additional 11 states, benefiting out-of-school girls, married girls, and girls with disabilities. The additional financing from the World Bank will further extend the project to 18 states and benefit over 15 million students, as well as teachers, administrators, and families. In a bid to bring relief and support to the affected households in Kaduna State, the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, has initiated the distribution of relief materials to 8,757 households affected by the 2022 flood disaster in the state. The Director General of NEMA, Mustafa Ahmed, who revealed this, stated that this effort falls under the Special National Economic and Livelihood Emergency Intervention Program. The distributed relief items include food supplies such as rice, beans, sorghum, and as well as non-food items like blankets, mats, mosquito nets, and detergents. Additionally, agricultural inputs such as sewing machines, grinding machines, water pumps, and other things were also included in this intervention program. The Deputy Governor of Kaduna State, Adiza Balarabe, while speaking on this development, expressed gratitude to the federal government for the relief assistance and encouraged beneficiaries to utilize the items to rebuild their lives and improve their economic conditions. And now to some education-related story. The West African Examinations Council, WAEC, is set to introduce computer-based tests, CBT, for its examinations. This was revealed by Mr. Patrick Aregon, the head of the national office, in an interview in Lagos. Aregon, who highlighted the challenges of implementing CBT for practical and essay papers, emphasized the need for computer literacy in schools and access to electricity to make this transition feasible, noting that WAEC intends to start with objective questions and eventually expand the CBT format. Aregan also expressed his desire to fully digitize all WAEC's operations alongside the CBT introduction. While acknowledging the challenges, he suggested a segregated market approach where schools that cannot afford CBT can continue with the traditional pencil and paper mode. So talking education, the National Board for Technical Education, NBTE, has called for a compulsory 50% inclusion of skill acquisition in the curriculum for secondary school students, adding that this would help the students to have a better understanding of their interest and abilities and improve them in decision making, thereby leading to their personal and professional development. The Executive Secretary, NBTE, Professor Idris Bugaji, said this in an interaction with the news agency of Nigeria on the board's newly launched top-up program for higher national diploma holders to acquire a Bachelor of Science in their choice course. He noted that enhancing technical education and vocational training for students in secondary schools would effectively identify talent that could be nurtured into profitable enterprises. Furthermore, he stated that the board had already taken steps to unbundle the curriculum to include skills qualification, adding that polytechnic students would now be made to learn a skill relating to the course of study before such a student could graduate. Away from that, in response to the removal of petrol subsidy by the federal government, philanthropists have partnered with filling stations in Borno State capital to sell petrol at a reduced price of 413 naira per litre for commercial motorcyclists, tricyclists, and taxi drivers in the state. The transport industry has faced challenges due to the introduction of 70 metro buses in Maiduguri, charging passengers a lower fare of 50 naira per drop. One of the filling station operators, Ibrahim Jibrin Mohammed, while speaking to newsmen, noted that he drew inspiration from the philanthropic efforts of the First Lady, Mrs. Oluremi Tinubu, who has been supporting the poor and victims of disasters across the country. He added that his decision to lower the petrol price is a reflection of his commitment to assisting the community during these trying times. Moving away from Nigeria, but still in Africa, Egypt has reached an agreement with the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to consolidate the first and second reviews of its economic reform program, following several delays in the first review due to questions regarding Egypt's progress in meeting IMF requirements. This follows IMF's approval of a $3 billion extended facility loan for Egypt in December, aimed at assisting the country in addressing its financial challenges intensified by the economic fallout from the Ukraine conflict. Notably, Egypt had committed to adopting a flexible exchange rate when entering into the loan agreement with the IMF last year. However, the official exchange rate has remained largely stable for almost 6 months at approximately 30.9 Egyptian pounds to the dollar, while on the black market, the exchange rate is around 39 pounds to the dollar. Still in Africa, Sudan's Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says he did not seek military support and instead advocated for a peaceful resolution to the ongoing conflict and the displacement of millions of civilians. General Burhan emphasized his request to neighboring states to cease sending mercenaries to support the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF. The conflict between the army and the RSF erupted in mid-April, stemming from disagreements over plans for a political transition and the integration of the RSF into the army. General Burhan affirmed the army's commitment to pursuing both negotiation and force as a means to end the conflict, with a preference for the path of negotiations. Let's take a breather before bringing you stories from the Middle East and other parts of the world. Stay tuned. Thanks for being there. Moving now to the Middle East, where the United Arab Emirates government has released a discussion paper titled "Ripple Effect of Water Scarcity: The Hidden Threats to Global Security and Prosperity," which stressed the urgent need for a coordinated response to combat the escalating global water scarcity crisis. The document, unveiled by the UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs during the United Nations General Assembly in New York, delves into the causes of global water scarcity, its adverse effects already visible in various regions, and a range of potential solutions to tackle this pressing issue. His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, UAE Minister of Foreign Affairs, announced the release of the report, underlining the growing problem of water scarcity and the severe risk it poses globally. The paper cautions that if current trends persist, water scarcity will lead to negative consequences such as loss of life, food insecurity, economic stagnation, humanitarian crisis, involuntary migration, geopolitical instability, and even armed conflicts. Still in the UAE, Dubai has secured its position among the top 5 global maritime centers on the 2023 International Shipping Center Development Index for the month of for 4 consecutive months in the year. Additionally, Dubai has been recognized as the leading hub for sea freight and logistics services in the Arab world, according to reports by the Baltic Exchange for Trade and Shipping and the Xinhua Agency of the China Economic Information Service. The chairman of the Ports, Customs and Free Zone Corporation, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, noted that this global recognition reinforces Dubai's leadership in the maritime shipping sector and highlights its substantial contributions to the global maritime industry's growth. Similarly, Sheikh Saeed bin Ahmed bin Khalifa Al Maktoum, executive director of the Dubai Maritime Authority, noted that Dubai's sustained high ranking over 4 years reflects its ongoing efforts to enhance competitiveness and efficiency in the maritime sector. Meanwhile, in its desire to combine modern technology with the preservation of religious values, the city of Qom in Iran is embracing the potential of artificial intelligence (AI) with enthusiasm. Religious leaders in their traditional attire are now exploring how AI can assist them in various activities, such as analyzing Islamic texts and issuing religious edicts. The leader of a state-linked organization promoting technology businesses in Qom, Mohammed Gupti, believes that AI can serve as a trusted assistant to senior clerics. By leveraging AI, the time taken to issue a fatwa can be reduced from 50 days to just 5 hours. This approach aligns with the country's evolving stance on embracing technological advancement while maintaining its Islamic identity. In response to the $24 billion money laundering scandal in Singapore, banks in the city-state are increasing scrutiny of customers from various countries, particularly China, as well as intensifying their efforts to trace the sources of wealth. Wealth advisors, asset managers, and private bankers have reported that the waiting period to open a private banking account has lengthened from less than a month to 3 to 4 months, while they also said that a lot of people need to key into this process. We'll take another break before moving on to other stories. Stay tuned. Many thanks for being there. In a bid to combat poverty and address climate changes issues in rural regions, French President Emmanuel Macron has invested $150 million in the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. Furthermore, France has undertaken the responsibility of hosting and coordinating the 13th replenishment of IFAD, signaling its commitment to this cause. In addition to this, France has also pledged to provide $43 million to the United States Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crisis, known as Education Cannot Wait, ACW, for the period spanning 2023 to 2026. Moving now to Britain, British Interior Minister Suella Braverman is set to address the challenges posed by illegal migration during her 3-day visit to the United States. In a keynote speech, Braverman will present a blueprint for combating the migration crisis and emphasize the innovative approaches that the UK has pioneered in addressing this issue. According to the Home Office, Braverman expressed concern about the unsustainable pressures created by the illegal migration, stressing that the movement of people across the globe is straining resources and systems in US, UK, Europe, and called for a collective reevaluation of international conventions and legal frameworks established over 50 years ago, suggesting they may need adaptation in an era of rapid travel and widespread smartphone use. And the story from Britain ends our package on the Morning News Update. Many thanks for watching. I am Blessing AG. Now stay tuned for the rest part of an exchange.
Glad to have you join us on Early Exchange once again. It's time for news analysis where we review all the trending business headlines across the world. And I'm joined by Sam Oruwuje, who is the Director of Policy. Glad to have you join us on this segment, Sam.
Thank you for having me, Femi.
How was your
Blessing,
weekend?
good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I had a great weekend. Thank you very much indeed.
And as usual, Blessing is here.
Yes, I am here.
Blessing, how was your weekend?
Yeah, short, but good.
Good. And productive. All right. So let's start the ball rolling. Now we're starting with our president. It seems like the first news of the day has to do with the president.
He's a newsbreaker.
All right. So the news is our president has approved implementation of 35 and 23% salary increase for staff of all federal tertiary institutions in the country. You know, Sam, last week we were talking about the issue of human capital development, and you emphasized on the need to, focus on the human aspect of every organization. For every organization, the human aspect is quite important. Now the president is coming up with this approval. What do you think will be the impact on the staff of these federal institutions?
I think first we have to thank the president for taking this initiative. In the last 8 years, it's been struggle between the Academic Staff Union of universities in respect of their salaries, and this increment will spur them and ginger them to work. So I think this is a president that has a listening ear to the aspirations of the Academic Staff Union. I think this is a welcome development. Why the proposal that was made for the increment represented about 200 and something percent, but then, as they say in the local parlance, I think this is just a new beginning, and I'm sure that there will be an improvement on this. That again, we challenge them to work, and apparently some of the agitations will die down naturally. And I think this is a good initiative, and I'm sure that they will be celebrating this as well.
What a good way for the president to start. If there's always this saying that half bread is better than none.
Yes,
if you're asking for more percentage and now you have 35, that's a good way to start. And one interesting thing is you can't rule away, good motivation is tied to when good allowances and all that. Now that the salary of this staff has been increased, we are hoping that it will motivate them, it will encourage them to give the best of service, and they will be able to do whatever is required. You must understand that for us to have good education, it requires good funding as well.
Yes.
And that's why the president has taken the bull by the horn to ensure that he takes the first thing, which is to motivate the federal staff. And I'm hoping this can be extended to the state universities and even to the civil service at large.
Well, it's for a salary increase for staff of all federal tertiary institutions in the country. So it then means that the universities would benefit from this. And I think this will go a long way in reducing, if ever it occurs, the chances of us having ASU strike and students being at home for a long time. But on the flip side, there are consequences to every action. Let's look at the market response. The market woman doesn't distinguish between a lecturer or someone in the academia and the other person who's coming to buy something from her. So I think we should also expect a market response. The market women want to have a share of the 25 and 35% salary increase. So the next time you send someone to the market, Femi, I don't know who that would be. Expect that they come
That is if I won't go to the market.
they come giving you a feedback in that regard.
It's always the natural effect where you hear salary increase and then what follows, increase in prices of goods and services, which is, the forces of demand and supply. And then when that play out, because like you said, an average market woman there doesn't understand that, these are for federal institutions, these are for state institutions. All she has heard is, okay, there's an increase in salary. Once this is approved, the next thing the woman is, to increase the price of certain goods, and then the services that follow, you understand, the prices are increased. And what that means is, even with the increase that you have, you are still spending more in order to enjoy the goods and services. Sam, I want you to talk to us. What significantly do you expect the president to do, this age-long controversy between ASU and the federal government is setting the pace now by increasing by approval of the increase in salary. Do you expect more respite to come to, ASU as a union, the issue of misunderstanding about agreement? Maybe, hopefully, he's going to take that route.
I think so. If he can make an input in terms of adjusting their salary, I'm sure for industrial climate and industrial harmony, I'm sure that all the other issues between ASU, particularly in terms of funding for the university, I'm sure the president is going to look into that. He's a man that has a common law for education, particularly from the Awolowo philosophy, which is being shared in the western part of the country. I'm sure that will come through quickly with the president. I have no doubt in my mind that the funding, which is a new budget that will be coming on stream, there will be an increment in the funding for education. This is just a tip in the iceberg, and I'm sure that the industrial relation or labor federal government relation, particularly from ASU, will improve tremendously.
Now, the president is still in the news. Like Blessing said, he's a newsmaker. Now, the next story talks about him, approving, talking about the approval of 535.6 billion loan from the World Bank. Now, the question is, like I always say, it is not a bad thing to obtain loan or to borrow money. But what is more important is you have an understanding of what you want to do with the money. We've always had issues of people borrowing money and eventually they're being diverted, they're not being used for the purpose intended. The issue of borrowing is an economic concept. In fact, it's a universal, practice where even the big countries, they borrow money. But interestingly, our president has highlighted what this money will be used for is to provide additional funding for the ongoing Adolescent Girls Initiative for Learning and Empowerment projects. And the project will expand from the current 7 states to additional 11 states, benefiting out of schoolgirls, married girls, and girls with disabilities. Sam, what do you see about this?
This is great because one of the alarming scenario over the last 15 years or thereabout is over 20 million out of school children. This initiative and this money will go a long way in empowering particularly the girl child in a way that will push the level of school enrollment, and this again will be sustainable over a period of time. And I do know that the president is coming from a business background before coming into politics, so he knows the dynamics of how you expend resource and the benefits and the outcome that will come out of that. So this is a good one, and this money is specifically tied to specific project, and I'm sure the timelines and the deliverables will be achieved within a short possible time, and the impact on the citizen will be far-reaching.
Yeah, so train a girl, you train a community. So it's in that line that the president is working. So not just empowering adolescent girls, but even married girls. And I like the fact that they put it that way, married girls, people who maybe because of religion or tradition got married when they should probably have been in school or getting empowered in one skill or the other, so that they can also be contributors in their family setting. Because when it's just one party supporting the finances of the home, the pressure is so much on the man, and if the man doesn't even have enough income, then it means that there's not enough resource to provide for the need of the house. But when you have both of them providing, then it's better. They can afford more of their basic needs. So it's a welcome development, and it's not just for the students. The teachers, administrators, and families will also benefit from this. So this really is going to families, and it will address a lot of social issues where there is learning provided, where there is empowerment provided, because many social issues are a byproduct of not enough learning and not enough empowerment. So it's good that the president is not just thinking in this direction, but taking steps to actually see this come through.
I like the fact that this time around we have target. This loan is targeted towards specific needs and towards specific set of people. So it makes it more robust when you have that kind of arrangement, not that the loan is being approved and then you don't even have an idea of what to do with it. And like, Sam said, we have a president who understands figures.
It's about being strategic and being clear with your vision.
Yeah, and we hope that the money will be used for the purpose intended. Now, let's take a dovetail to education, which the West African Examination Council is set to introduce computer-based tests for its examination. We talked about the impact of technology, the need to upgrade from the conventional kind of education or conducting tests. And now, WAEC is taking that initiative to introduce technology. Sam, what do you think will be the impact of this?
Yeah, technology is the driver and is the future of the world. So we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking about machine learning and all that. So if WAEC is taking that initiative to drive the examination processes through technology, that's a work on development, and I think it's key. That will help to scale the learning process, particularly for those who are doing exam from secondary school and going into tertiary institution. So there's no option for WAEC rather than to move in the direction of technology. I think it's welcoming, and I think that will enhance the learning capacity and the speed at which the examinations are released, because when you do computer-based tests, the results are always there immediately, and that will reduce some of the issues that has to do with examination malpractices and some other things that WAEC has been accused of in the past.
I remember when I had to sit for my WAEC, that was years back. Don't ask me the year. I'm not that old. But we never had the privilege of having opportunity to, to use a computer. In fact, there was none. And I'm happy this is coming now because it's going to be of help, Then we were doing the conventional thing, the manually driven exam, where everything has to be manually done. You have to sit down and write for hours and all that. But with computer-based, it makes it efficient. Technology brings efficiency. It makes it faster. It makes it easier. And I'm happy that the new generation of students who are going to sit for that exam will enjoy what we didn't enjoy our own time.
It's not just going to be enjoyment, because there is a challenge to this, which WAEC has noted, the gap in technology development. Some students may have an issue or a challenge having to use the CBT, and that they actually recognize with the part of the essay papers, having to type and all of that. And they also noted that because of electricity not being available in every part of the country at same level, there are some areas where you can have maybe like 18 hours of power supply. In some areas it is different. And so because of these challenges, they made the alternative where these are not available, students can use the traditional way. But I think that part of the essay is still being considered. So it's just going to be like for the objective, where they can just click options and they go on with the exam. Yes, I like it. It exposes them. And it also will reduce cost for me for WAEC. Imagine the cost of printing all the papers and you have to distribute. So, and the issue of malpractice, sometimes we hear of questions being leaked even before the examination date. So that will curb it too. And it's going to be a good one if we can do this for all our examinations, all central examinations, where people can take the examinations conveniently wherever they are. I think it's something that the education sector should pursue.
All right, still on education, the National Board for Technical Education, NBTE, has called for a compulsory 50% inclusion of skill acquisition in the curriculum for secondary school students. The emphasis now is skill acquisition. Like in the past, the emphasis, you have to read your book, you have to ensure that you have a good grade, and then you have a good job. But now we're in the age of ICT, the age of information technology, the age of skill acquisition. Now the National Board for Technical Education is making it compulsory, 50% inclusion in skill acquisition. What's the reaction to this, sir?
That's again a welcome development, looking at the dynamics of changes in the global environment. There's a need to constantly review the curriculum. So what the National Board for Technical Education is saying is that for every curriculum, whether you're in the grammar school, you need to have an option. 50% of the curriculum should take cognizance of technical education. This will provide a balanced development. So if the other element of education, if you can't deploy that after graduating, maybe your technical skill competence will be able to provide some form of employment for you. I think this is good for national development.
Yes, it's good because that's one of the reasons polytechnics were set up. So if those who do technical courses in the polytechnic come out and they still have just theoretical knowledge, what is the essence? So that they should have the practical knowledge of a particular skill or any skill before they leave school. It's good. But I think they can also make it something that is well structured. It's a polytechnic. Rather than they having practical knowledge of a particular skill before they graduate, why don't we just structure it? So if you're studying, for instance, mechanical engineering, of course you know practically what it means to be a mechanical engineer. If you're studying architecture, for instance, you know practically what that means. Instead of it being like maybe just one course at the end or something you need to do in order to graduate. I think that way people will really have a grasp on that skill.
All right, let's go to Borno State. This time around, the news is not about Boko Haram, but it's about petrol.
Good to know.
Which is good news. Now, the news is a philanthropist have partnered with filling stations in Borno State to sell petrol at a reduced price of 430 naira. That's remarkable, you know. Like I always say, we don't expect government to do everything. This is just someone or a group of people who feel the need to, you know, help the plight of Nigerians or people living in Borno, where they don't have to spend more in getting, you know, how sensitive petrol is, you know, is an essential, a daily essential. For you as a person to survive in a country like Nigeria, you need to have access to petrol, not just to power your businesses, but to even power your operations, even your homes. There are certain reasons why this product is necessary. Now, this young people or this group of persons have taken the initiative to even, you know, help the plight of people in Borno State by subsidizing. Now, they are taking the position of the federal government. If the federal government has removed subsidy, now they are putting subsidy back, and in order to be able to help the plight of people living in Borno State. Sam, what's your reaction to this?
We thank them for the philanthropic gesture, and I think that will help people from Borno State. How sustainable, that may be the question, but we thank them for bringing that initiative, and taking some naira and kobo off the fuel pump will go a long way to improve the socioeconomic life of people that come from that state. Maybe people from the peripheral state, we don't know the logistics of how that will be distributed. I'm sure that people within the contiguous state want to go to Borno to get part of those gestures. Anyway, that's just on the soft note. But particularly interesting for that people are thinking about citizens and how they can help to reduce the impact on the negative impact on the removal of fuel subsidy in some bread. That's good.
It's good. I wish we could have this replicated in every part of the country so that motorcyclists, tricyclists, and even taxi drivers, bus drivers can benefit from this. It'll go a long way in ameliorating the pains that they go through trying to make ends meet. And I also hope that those who are benefiting, the transporters who are benefiting from this in Borno State, are also extending the good gesture to the passengers, because when you get fuel at 430 naira per litre, then you should not be charging what you used to charge when you were buying it at over 600 naira. So it's a good one. I wish it would be sustainable, but I fear it might not be, because this money coming from private individuals, so how long can they keep this going? So if more people can key into this, then of course it can extend for a longer period of time. And let's hope that Borno states may just be calling with this to other states and say, let's do this. Yes, we can.
Let's hope this could be replicated in other states and by other actors. All right, what a way to wrap up the news analysis. Sam, thanks for joining us on this segment of news analysis.
My pleasure always, Femi, and blessing.
All right, we'll go on a short break. When we return, our discussion for today will start in a very big way. Stay with us. It's still early exchange, and our conversation today will be a special one. You're aware that come October 1st, Nigeria will celebrate another round of independence, and Nigeria is going to clock 63. But ahead of that, we want to start a discussion that has to do with national discourse, looking at the state of the nation. And today we'll be looking at census as a tool for national planning. To shed more light on this, we are being joined by Ida Hoser, who is Director of Research and special analyst, in-house analyst. Ida Hoser, glad to have you join us this morning.
Highly special. I like good morning, Femi. Blessing, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I like using the word special because of what you bring to the table every day. Glad to have you join us.
All my pleasure to be here this morning.
All right, let's start with census. We're looking at census as a tool for national planning.
Oh, yes.
In the last 2 decades, Nigeria, we've not had a reliable figure when it comes to census. The last one we had was that of 2006. Now, talk to us, what is the significance of having census and even a reliable figure is significance to national planning?
Census is very critical for national development. Because if you know your figures, a whole lot of things can happen. You are able to look at your demographics and you understand the spread across the nation, then you know where to put your money. And this is very critical. And in terms of planning, and you know what takes priority, because the business of government is resource allocation. Now, you need to know where resources should be put by the government. In other words, a substantial share of the resources, where should government put it? And this can only come if you have a reliable data that tells you who is who, what age range is dominant, what are people income like, what a kind of housing gap you have find out. All these things will be encapsulated in your census figure, and then you put this on the table, the National Economic Planning, and of course, the Ministry of Finance will be able to sit down and allocate resources based on the demographics that your census show. But like you said, unfortunately, over the century, we have not been able to really have a reliable census figure. And I think the near perfect figure we had was the one that was taken by Beatrice in 1901. And of course, following the disruption of the First and Second World War, there were no census again until 1952, 1953. And the figure came out fairly still okay, with little disputation. But after the 1952-1953 census, we have not been able to really sit down to determine how many people really live in this part of the world. Because the 1962 census was fraught with a lot of irregularities, because even the British officer who supervised the counting in 1962 came out that there were no demographic basis for the increase in figure of the census compared to the 1953 census. So you have a situation where in 1953 you had about 31.6% a million people, and by 1963 or 62, the figure had risen to 55.2 million people. Now, in 1952, the northern region was having almost a 50% of the population. And by 1962 census, the figures skewed, with the easterner having about 70% rise, the westerner having 100% rise in their figure, and the north was a 0.5 rise. This was a big problem. And so accepting that figure was a nightmare. And Tafawa Balewa had to cancel that figure and order for another run. And when, of course, it was during 1963, of course, the people in the East refused to accept the figure. And, of course, from that time, we attempted in 1973, it didn't work out. And then, of course, 1991, Babangida tried to do one. And, of course, what is the real issue here? The real issue here was that at the table of negotiation in 1953, after the census in the London Conference, the North demanded that if we have half of the population, then we should have half of the representation. So out of the 149 members of the parliament that was just inaugurated by the 1951 Constitution, the Northerners demanded that they should have half of that in representation, since their population speaks so. So it became a political tool. And this has been the real undoing in the inability of our country to actually arrive at a census figure that can be really reliable.
Okay, the last census was conducted in 2006, yes, and that's several years ago. Now, one census was built to hold in May this year, but that did not happen. We've seen that there have been delays, postponement after postponement in conducting another census due to several challenges. One of them is funding, and we also have challenges such as logistics. Let's look at funding, because that was a key issue when that census was announced to happen in May. the amount that was mentioned by the National Population Commission billed to have that census done alarmed a lot of Nigerians. You even had some Nigerians saying, let's count ourselves, don't bother, because this is too much.
That's
so
about
funding,
$1.8 billion.
why is it so expensive? And what can Nigeria do about funding? Because census has to happen after 2006. There are several years
17
down
years.
the line,
Yeah.
and census should have been done. How do we tackle the issue of funding? And why is it so expensive to have census done? I'm making reference now to the budget that was earmarked for conducting a census.
Yeah, you see, the issue of funding is directly also related to logistics. Because you're having a whole lot of your nation, especially those who are in the wetland, where of course you will need to use boats to cross waters by the enumerators to be able to access these areas. Of course, this also poses a whole lot of cost and to the process and the exercise. Generally, and I think it's global, census is expensive. I try to do the arithmetic, just to do a base comparison between America and Nigeria, for example. The 2020 census in America cost them about 14 billion US dollars. And if you put that to figure per their population of about 331 million people, you get that to be about $42 per person. And you can convert that to an exchange rate and know what that would be in Nigeria. That's about 32,000 naira per person. And when you compare our own figure, which was the total budget of about 869 billion that the Bureau asked for, and you put that to figure, that comes to about 4,226 naira per person to count. That's what we are looking at. So you see, but sometimes when we use this figure and say 800 billion, people just feel and say, what are they going to use 800 billion for? Now, understand that this 800 billion is to walk around the length and breadth of the 923,000 square kilometer landmass of Nigeria, both the riverine area and even the desert area. So this is where the challenge really lies. And you need enumerators who are going to do this, and of course they are going to be paid for doing this work of counting the household, counting the number of people. And this is why you see most of the countries don't do census every year. The convention is usually that is done every 10 years because of the volume that is attached to it. So most nations do their census every 10 years, and then of course use the percentage of increase to project for the years that are in between. So I think this is why it is quite expensive.
Now, looking at Nigeria, the first post-independence census was conducted in 1962. Have we learnt our lessons? Have we grown over the years? One will have expected that over the years we'll have been able to master this exercise. But talk to us about your impression about the lessons inherent with what happened in 1962, some of the irregularities, and then that led to irregular allocation of resources and funds. Have we learned our lessons?
It's difficult to learn. You see, the problem really here was that if you look at the 1952 census, because we have to always go back, because that's the foundation to the crisis. Now, a lot of people did not agree with the figure because they thought that people were undercounted. And the reason for this were very simple. Because at that time, people thought that the British were going to use the figure to impose tax on people. And so many people did not come out to be counted. Some people were hiding in the bush because they thought that the basis of this census was going to be for taxation. But yes, of course, the British had intention of knowing what revenue was coming to government so that they can do national planning. But the response of Nigeria was different. And you don't forget history. 1929, the Aba Women riots were about issues of taxation. And this is, in short, formed the basis of Chinua Achebe's work, Things Fall Apart. Where, of course, you see that that Central was not able to hold, because you will see tradition that was evolving into a modern one because of the new things that the white man and colonialism brought that were trying to undermine the tradition and the culture of the people. So these contradictions were there. And so many people, African people, really do not believe. But by the time they called to the London Conference in 1953, it became the basis for negotiation. So the political undertone to census was introduced at the London Conference. Because of course they don't say, oh, we were more than you. If we are more than you, we are half the population of Nigeria, then of course we demand half the representation for equity, proportionality. So this was what happened. And subsequently, the eyes of these other persons were opened. And by 1962, census came, figures were inflated according to Tafawa Balewa, that the West census grew by 100%, and the Eastern grew by 70%, because they were now also saying, okay, we need equity. Now our people are properly counted. So while we have a problem of undercounting in 1952, in 1962, it was a problem of overcounting. So this is the issue that, of course, we are still trying to grapple with. Don't forget that even in terms of the creation of, for example, local government, is based on your census figure. And so it is the volume and the number of population that you have that will determine the number of local government that you have. Now, in terms of electioneering, the delimitations of constituency is also based on population. So that also determines the number of reps that will represent you at the center. Now, even in terms of resource allocation, it's also based on per head, the number of people that are coming from each region. And now, when we are struggling to have more local government, we are struggling to have more representation, we are struggling to have more revenue from the federation account, definitely this manipulation will always be there. And this has been the bane of the census crisis in Nigeria since independence.
Now let's look at the challenges with logistics. We have a system where the enumeration and even the demographic maps are inaccurate and some are even outdated. Let's even look at the urban cities. You're trying to locate a house in a particular street, and you look at the way the houses are enumerated, you're finding number 10 at the middle, you're finding number 50 at the beginning, and you're finding number maybe 70 somewhere, and so you just keep going along one particular street. You're trying to locate maybe number 15, and you're expecting that, okay, this is number 10, number 15 shouldn't be far away, but number 15 could be at the extreme end. So in remote settlements, how will the enumerators tackle this? How will they ensure that every house is counted, every person is counted, having a credible exercise?
I don't think the counting of houses is a problem when you speak in terms of logistics in this direction. You see, what the enumerators are trained to do is actually to go into the streets. When you enter into a house, you put a census marker on the house, that this house has been numbered. And of course, you have to progress from the beginning of a street to its ending. And then a number is attached to each house. And that number is recorded on the form that the enumerators will fill. That really would not pose a lot of problem.
What about the remote settlements getting to
yes,
some
of course.
areas?
The same process will apply. No matter how scattered the houses are, of course, when you finish counting a house, you put a permanent marker on that house. The census number is put on the house. And anybody who is coming will know that this house has already been counted. So that really will not be the challenge. The real challenge in terms of logistics is especially in areas, of course, that are not, even in terms of our elections. You see this plays out from time to time, where, of course, you cannot deliver ballots to some certain areas because of access to those places. Where we have no road, there are some villages that, of course, motor cannot get to. You see that you have to drive a bicycle or you have to drive a
You go
motorbike
by boat.
to be able to go there. Or
That's
some
understand.
places you have to use boat. Now, these are critical issues, and this, of course, create cost for the enumerators. So, it's either you have to buy your motorcycles, otherwise, which means if you have to move and they are going to count the area on a daily basis, they have to be paying transportation to go to that place. And this is added to the cost of enumeration. Now, even the allowances that are given to the enumerator, it also will increase because of the hazard allowance and the rest of it. So this is where logistics play a very critical role because of accessibility. We don't have roads. And this is where, of course, again, local governments have failed the entire nation because the things that they are supposed to be doing, creating earthen roads within their terrain that make movement very easy, have not been achieved in the last 63 years.
Talking about logistics, from experience, do you think it would be more appropriate if government decides to outsource it or handle, government handles logistics itself? Because over the years, you've seen this mechanism playing out, the same story, the same scenario. And there's this saying that you can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. Do you think private entities should be brought in to handle the issue of logistics to take the burden off the federal government?
Oh, that's already been done. That's already been done. There's a whole lot of partnership that is going on even in terms of funding. And if you look at this one that was supposed to have held in May, over 291 billion had been disbursed already. And of course, all the enumerators have been trained. These are also part of the logistics. Because you need to train and detail those who are going to do the enumeration. Now, even the delimitation of the space has to be done so that you can map the places out where this enumeration had to happen. All these pre-census issues had actually been accomplished. Now, the real big challenge is now to go actually to do the proper and actual counting. Now, but for me, really, it's not even the private sector. If we can really handle the issue of trust in our environment, for example, which is the real basis, local government could actually do these things effortlessly over a period of a year or two without necessarily having to invest this massive resource. Just the same way the issue of immunization is handled by the local government. You see the local government staff moving from house to house for the purpose of immunization. We can actually have census offices in the local government. But the challenge is, will the figures be reliable? Now there's a politics that is attached to the figures. So this is where really the challenge is for us as a nation, where we really cannot trust public officers to do things and do it from their heart without hidden intentions and motives.
So when the census eventually happens, for elections, there are restrictions of movement. Would there be need? But there's an argument that since it's census and just counting, for restriction of movement, maybe the claim that day and no work day for people to be home for the counting to happen. Will all of that be necessary to happen? And for how long do we need to do that? A day, 2 days?
Yeah, this is again, it also speaks to the real issues of who we are as a people. I don't think we need to really stop business because we want to count people. We should not. And I think maybe when you look at what people are doing real elsewhere, we can even actually make it simpler and easier by having census table in wards where people can voluntarily come and register themselves. So you have an enumerator who sits down, just the way we register voters. And we create those constituencies, use the same constituency. And people sit down, the people in the locality, they will come and register themselves. and you set the time frame for registration, maybe 1 week, 2 weeks. That makes it a lot cheaper. All that you will just need to do is to have, at the end of the day, people who back check the figure. What that means is that you have to hire maybe an agency who will just take some sample of the forms filled by this individual and go to sample to see if those figures tally with what is on the ground. This is done in quantitative research. So when we send field workers out, they do their feed. We also recruit an agency to go and do back check to be sure that the figures are right. And I think this is one arrangement that can be done and will really reduce the logistics challenge that you speak about.
You know, let's make reference to the last attempt towards conducting census in Nigeria. The minister was quoted as asking for support in cash and kind from Nigerians. Do you think there's a need for Nigerians, to be part of funding for census or to donate money? Does that sound professional or universal?
Well, I think it really won't be a bad idea. And this is one issue that we cannot talk about too much. The role and the place of volunteerism, especially when you look at a nation that is so poor, even though there is so much resource that nature has given to us, there are still potentials. So cannot use them to buy chewing gum at the moment. Now, the real issue is that I don't think maybe it should be cash. It can actually be volunteers. People who can volunteer to help in the enumeration within their localities. And I think it's actually relying on this kind of support will help drag down the cost for census. But I don't think it's immoral if rich people who cannot volunteer can support those who are doing it. You know, this happened even during the electioneering, where you have parties coming and saying people who are doing registration, they help them with canopy setup, they help them with generator to power their equipment. Some people bring lunch for the people who are doing the registration and all that. People do that and they volunteer. And I don't think it's out of place if nationals can actually come out to see, because we have a nation, and this has been my argument. If we speak as we're talking right now, that over 92% of our revenue is expended on servicing debt, it will be immoral to continue to ask government to borrow. So whatever private individuals and citizens can do to actually complement the effort of government in this direction, for me, it will be a welcome development.
Okay, let's look at the need for having a census done. We have data collected at different levels. When people want to open a bank account, they need to do biometric for BVN, and then we have the national identity card, national identity number. Can this put together, synergizing this data, achieve the same result as having a census would to reduce costs?
Well, I think it will to a very large extent, but it cannot completely give you the accuracy of data. So whether we like it or not, we will still have to do census. And that's why you see, even in the most advanced of economies, they are still doing census. But they do it every 10 years. Not to say that their national identity program is not working. You see, because if you have a database, for example, where debts are not properly recorded, for example, and bets are not properly recorded, and access is still denied, it will be very difficult for you to capture actual figures. Especially when you look at our environment like Nigeria. So you see, some people just die and they just go, but they have a national ID card. Now, you still will capture that in your data as if the person is alive. So, because the national ID card has no means of knowing whether somebody is dead or not dead. But that said, there's a whole need for us to actually integrate our data. And this is very, very important. I remember the last time I was having a class and I was saying to them that, look, even with the BVN, as foolproof as it is, that some people are still beating it. Because you can register BVN here, and then you go and capture another NIN. At the point of thumb printing, the system should be able to tell the network that, look, this person has been captured differently elsewhere. But I've seen situations where people who have BVN, they have NIN number, but they have different names on the BVN and on the NIN. This is a problem. So this speaks to our ability to integrate and sync all our data that we are collecting. Because if, for example, the national ID card is working, we don't need any voter registration. Because actually save us money. All the eligible voters just go to the pool with their national ID card and not voter's card. Because that tells your age, that tells where you live. So if you come to the polling unit, the person there will be able to determine whether you are supposed to vote here or not to vote here. So these are issues that we can actually resolve and save costs in other areas. But unfortunately, you go to road safety, you capture data. You go to immigration, you capture data. You go to the banks, you capture data. And I don't think this is very healthy. If, of course, I have a bank account, I want to open a bank account, and I have a national ID card, the bank should find a way to actually call up my data by a code that gives who I am, whether my facial identification, everything that concerns me should just come at once. And then we will save ourselves a whole lot of money. But whether we have a foolproof national identification, my point is that we will still need to do census to get to a near accurate figure for the purpose of planning.
All right, as we wrap up, let's talk about the need for transparency and accountability. You know, how do we ensure that the money that has been budgeted or released are used for intended purpose? You know, they're talking about transparency here. And then what do you think can be done to improve the processes or the exercise of census in Nigeria?
It's important that we emphasize these issues of transparency and accountability. There are people that are giving money and they are able to spend the money well and bring it back. I just mentioned the American Bureau for Statistics just now. Their 2020 census, the projection was about 15.4 billion US dollars. But the actual money spent is about 14 billion. That's accountability. That is not that once we say, oh, census is going to cost 890, which is actually budget. And it's either we finish the entire money or we are asking for more money because it has not gone around. And this is because a whole lot happens where people don't have values. And that's why we will continue to speak to the value system of our people. Because if we all have values and we will do things well, and we understand that the whole money belongs to all of us, it's our commonwealth, and we have to all protect it so that our children can have good life, the issue of transparency becomes very, very good. But people must know that there's a life also beyond elections. So census is not just for election purpose. Even in terms of private sector planning, their manufacturing is also critical, because you really need to know your market and your audience and know where they live. So I think that all these sensitization we need to do, that people know that census is not about political representation. There are other factors that are critical to the use of census. We know our demography. We know the number of children. We know the number who are out of school. We know the home gap, the home gap or the homelessness gap in the country. All these things, how government determine where infrastructure should be, the number of people that can access it, all these are critical. And these for me are far outweigh political representation, which of course had preconditioned the falsification of census data in Nigeria in the past 6 decades.
Thank you very much, Delso. Someone's talking to us about the challenges with having a census, and we've looked at funding and logistics as we've begun the pre-independence series. Yes, in case you're not a Nigerian or you didn't check your calendar today, but just days before Nigeria's independence anniversary. And so this week is going to be a series as we look at issues concerning nation building. And today we're starting off, or we have started off with census as a critical tool for national planning. We'll go on a break, and so after the break there'll be a report looking at the issue of census. We'll return after that report to talk some more on census. Stay tuned.
Census is more than just a number. It's a reflection of our changing demographics, social and economic data about an entire population in a specific geographic area at a given point in time. It's a tool that helps us to make informed decisions about our future, from where to build schools and hospitals to how to allocate resources fairly. In Nigeria, the current population is about 226 million based on Worldometer elaboration of the latest United Nations data. This is equivalent to 2.78% of the total world population. The postponement of the May 3, 2023 population and housing census in the country was attributed to the government's transition program and the post-election atmosphere. Despite the availability of databases like BVN and NIN, a census remains crucial due to its completeness, specificity, and timeliness in capturing demographic information. The possibility of conducting another census in Nigeria hinges on various factors, including government commitment, funding availability, and logistical readiness. Having a credible census has been quite challenging. The process is plagued by issues like undercounting, overcounting, data quality concerns, privacy issues, outreach difficulties in marginalized communities, political interference, amongst others. Overcoming these challenges demands meticulous planning, robust public awareness campaigns, well-defined data collection and processing protocols, adequate funding, political stability, and transparent reporting. Government and census authorities are to work diligently to ensure that the census yields reliable data, which forms the foundation for effective national planning and policy making. Census is a vital tool for building a stronger and more equitable world. A collective effort towards conducting a successful census will help in shaping the future of our nation. Damilola Ogunjobi, Suk News.
Thank you very much, Dami, for that report that looked at census as a tool for national planning. Looking further into the issue of census, we'll talk about the interference of politics and ethnic sentiment. So we're looking at political interference and ethnic sentiment, and we're joined again by Sam Oruju, who is Director, Policy Research and Development, Femi Wash. Thank you for being back here.
My pleasure, Blessing and Femi.
All right, but what we're saying, there are different challenges that hinder Nigeria from having a census after the last one that was conducted in 2006. We've talked about funding, we've talked about logistics, looking now at political interference and ethnic sentiment, which has been a very key challenge to census. Why do we keep having that? And how can that be erased? Political interference and ethnic sentiment, starting with political interference.
All right, thank you very much. Census has become a major challenge in Nigeria, even pre-independence, post-independence, up to, I think the most reliable census was the one conducted in 1991. That was acceptable by a majority of Nigeria. Even in 1973, that was very contentious. Even the 2006 figure was equally contentious. The reasons are obvious. It also highlighted to some of those core challenges. When you talk about issue of representation, revenue allocation, these are core issues that have gone into the political interference in census data collation. But the point is, from the pre-independence and post-independence area, there's been a mutual suspicion among the various ethnic groups in Nigeria. To what extent is this data that is being collected, are they really the true data of Nigerians? Do one ethnic group population greater than the other ones? These are the core reasons why there are political interference. In a country where you have over 250 ethnic group with over 500 language, the challenge is I think it's essentially about the mutual suspicion among the various ethnic nationality that make up Nigeria. But the challenge is that you must have census to determine beyond representation, beyond the funding. And Dausa earlier spoke about the importance in terms of driving private sector businesses. Even for public policy enunciation, you need evidence-based data. For you to do a health policy, education policy, you need data. So this interference must be reduced by public education to show that this data will help to provide adequate facilities for the various ethnic nationalities. So that's mutual suspicion, what happened between the North, the West, and the East in 1963, even up to 1973. I think the one that was conducted in 1991 by Babangida was the most credible one. Incidentally, I participated in that one as a youth service corps member, as an enumerator in Kwara State. So other challenges, even when you do the enumeration, religion is even a major challenge. Even when you want to enumerate people, people just count certain people in their household. You can't even see them physically. So what is key, politics is critical, is a dominant issue in Nigeria, but to what extent can we reduce this interference? I think we need to have a political will to drive the process of another census beyond the logistic issues and funding.
Now, according to United Nations, census is supposed to take place between, let's say, within 10 years. But Nigeria, we've not had one in recent times. What will be the impact of this on national planning?
It has negative impact on national planning because the assumption that we have is that we are 200 and something, some fraction, 200 and something million people. But if you look at the population dynamics in terms of new birth and the high ratio in terms of socioeconomic opportunity to people, more children have been born. And for planning purposes, we don't even know the actual population. So the challenge is that for those in public policy, it's very difficult to plan when you don't have evidence-based data. There are data, but it must be evidence-based data, and census is one of those evidence-based data that we need for planning. So it's a challenge for national planning. Therefore, it's important for this new regime to find a way to get appropriate funding so that we get counted again for national planning purposes. So it's important that we need to count ourselves in spite of political interference, ethnic sentiment, logistic issues, and funding. We need to know the actual population. If we look at the dynamics projected by the United Nations by 2030, we're likely to be XY population. So if we don't know the actual data, they will not be able to plan from a strategic point of view for the next 7 years or thereabout.
Talking about strategy, seeing how strategic census is and how different interest group, different ethnic group want to use it to their advantage. How then can we rule out the interference of ethnic sentiment? It will always be there, but how do we ensure a credible census that is not colored by ethnic sentiment or any form of political interference?
Thank you for technology, and technology is an enabler with improvement in technology. I think the data that will be collected in the next census will be very authentic because the other data collection instruments that are technologically driven, we should be able to enhance the credibility, the reliability, and the viability of the data collated from the census. So the sentiment will always be there. People will try to manipulate the figures, even double counting. And I think technology has a way to eliminate some of those counting that will come through political manipulation. So therefore, machine tools, technology will help to improve on the credibility of the census figure there too.
What do you think can be done to solve this problem? Like you said, he's been there even pre-independence, post-independence. What can be done, you know, to ensure that this ethnic sentiment is not being brought to an important exercise like census?
I think public education is very key. Politicians must educate their constituents on the importance of census, and that census beyond representation and revenue allocation is equally critical for planning social amenities for various communities. That if you are properly counted, then we know the number of hospitals, health centers, the number of children that are born in a particular community, so that government can plan adequately to cater for those people. So those are the kind of education that we must, the National Population Commission, on the other hand, must equally enforce this education through their various offices in the local government by deploying town criers that tell people about the importance of population beyond the ethnic connotation that drive those interference.
Okay, let's look at some misconceptions towards census. Just like we have voter apathy, we could also have an apathy towards citizens participating in census. Some persons believe that regardless whether they come out to vote or not. It's the result that has been concocted in some quarters that will be presented. Same way some people think that whether or not they present themselves to be counted, it's the result that has actually been formulated in some quarters that will be presented. Acceptance of a census result. What should be the approach before census and after census?
I think generally it's education and public enlightenment. When people know that when they are counted, even in spite of their misgiving that this can be manipulated, and that this data that is collected is for their personal interest in terms of social service delivery to the various community, I think they're able to buy into those processes. But what is key, in my view, is that the National Population Commission must constantly engage with the communities pre-census, during and after the counting. And I'm sure if data, as they are collating those data, there are information that can show that these are the actual people counted in those communities, then their confidence level will be improved over a period of time. As people are being counted, the data are shown almost immediately. So that will not be subject to manipulation. I think that's, in my view, we help to douse tension in terms of manipulation of figures.
Let's look at the structure of National Population Commission as we speak. There's this saying that he who plays the pipe dictates the tune. So this brings in the sentiment that maybe National Population Commission needs to enjoy a sort of independence or autonomy in order to avoid this issue of political interference. What's your take on that?
If you see it from the Independent National Commission that enjoys some independence, there has always been issue with even elections. I think what is important is that the public need to change its mindset about certain public service delivery, in the sense that even though where there's a mutual suspicion, like I mentioned earlier, these data are important, whether it's independent, whether is the way it's currently considered, whether it's reform. Once that level of mutual suspicion is there, the composition and the structure will not necessarily matter. But what is key, in my view, is the level of education across various local government, state, communities, and the federal level. And for reliability of the data, I think once those data are collected based on artificial intelligence and technology, those results should be published almost immediately as they are counted in the community. That will, over time, reduce that mutual suspicion. Whatever the structure is, I think what is key is to drive the level of education that mutual suspicion can be reduced.
So when census is done, it means we'll have new information of how much, the number of people we have in a particular area, the relevant information about them will be provided. So this will also provide political advantage for some areas. Now, that's whether that is accepted by some areas or not, but it then means that with the new information, it will provide some form of political advantage for some areas. Now, how would that impact politics at the end of the day? And how will it impact subsequent elections?
No, representation in terms of population will continue to be a political issue, because so what is key in this regard is that representation, which is always a major political issue, will continue to be there. But then representation continually is based on the population. Like Kano, for example, has more local government, so they have more representation. So when they are doing delimitation of constituencies, once there's an increase in the population of those communities, the delimitation exercises for administrative purposes will be redone to meet the aspiration of those communities based on their population dynamics.
Okay, there have been some some groups or some parts of the country have been advocating for more states, particularly in the eastern states, eastern region. They've been advocating for one more state to be created to equal with some other regions of the country. Now, after this is done, are we going to see more advocacy for creation of new local governments, creation of more states in certain regions with figures that will arrive from the census?
I think
would that justify the need for the creation of more local governments and even states?
Well, in terms of creation of more states, personally, I don't really believe in creation of more states. But for political balance, maybe the one state that is being requested from the eastern region, if that is done, then that will just okay to balance the political configuration. In other words, once there are increase in population, I know there's a delimitation that will call for political consideration, terms of constituencies and all that. But on the other hand, I don't think really that people should focus on state creation. What people should focus on is the revenue allocation that are derivable to various states. To what extent are these revenue used for development? I think the advocacy from communities should be the impact of the current revenue that comes to their various states and local government. To what extent do they impact positively on development and social amenities in those areas? I think that's key for me.
Now let's take a shift to the other arm of the discussion, which is the issue of public awareness and participation. Now, from your observation, you talked about the last census you participated as a core member. That could be some years ago. Now,
1991, precisely.
Oh, great, great. Now, talk to us. What's your observation as regards the level of participation, the level of awareness? And then do you think if government announces another census now, Nigerians or Africans will be willing to participate or see it as a necessity? Talk to us about the level of awareness. And
no, I think the awareness is there. Well, what is more important is that the national population and other stakeholders that are involved in population's data collection must find a way to push public awareness on the importance of data collection and the impact it has even on the deliverable that they expect from government. I think that's the way to go. That census is not just for political representation or just for revenue allocation, that you need those data for planning, even for private sector initiative that will help to create employment opportunity. So key, again, education. Even communities, traditional rulers must be involved in trying to create those advocacy and awareness for community to partake in enumeration.
Sorry, Sam, my question is, from your experience, to talk about the level of participation. You know, we've had reports of people on the day census is to be conducted, going to firms, going to for their own business reasons and their own personal engagements. So that's the area I would like you to address, the level of participation, what happens with the experience you've had in 1991, the level of participation.
Yeah, what I had, the experience in 1991 was very okay. The only challenge where I took part as an enumerator was religious issues, where people in the household, they just list the name of people in the household, particularly women. You're not able to count them as a man. I think that's the only challenge. So we need more education in that area. Beyond the cultural and religious imperative, I think the participation is okay. And with the level of technology and awareness on the importance of data, I'm sure that more participation will be gotten from citizens if we come to another full cycle of census.
Okay, still talking about participation. I talked about apathy a while ago, how some persons may just have the apathy to it and that they're not really concerned. Now, how do we come to a level where everybody is keen into the process and making themselves available where they should be and offering the right support? Because if you have enumerators go into the interiors, you would need people to guide them because some of them may be new to those areas. Now, how do we come to that level where it becomes a thing that people own, a process that people own and are willing to offer any form of support that is needed?
I think again, I'm sorry that I'm using this word too often, key and central to this information gathering, particularly census, is a level of education and awareness. But in terms of our party, I know government do normally declare holidays for national population counting. So if the holidays are declared, normally there are people who are enforced that people remain within their community so that they are counted. Beyond even the human element of census, you have even housing census. You know, the houses are equally counted as a basis of enumeration to know the level of population. It's even housing as an aspect. So people, traditional rulers, community heads, civil society organization, international NGO must be involved in the campaign that if you are counted, is more beneficial for the community when you present yourself for counting, because that will improve on in terms of allocation, in terms of health services, road network, rural electrification that will come into the community, because those data will help in driving public policy initiative.
How much of awareness do we have when it comes to the data, you know, being aggregated for census and using it in planning? How much has that translated to progress and development for Nigeria?
I think the various ministries and departments of government use data for planning. What is key and critical is to what extent, what is the quality of the data, how reliable are these data that have been collected, but they use data for planning, and data continually will be central to planning and national development. So the importance of census is key for national growth, national development, and even for national integration. If we know the number of people in certain region, then you're able to plan specifically that meet the aspirations and needs of those regions.
Now, for this to happen, for the enumeration to happen, ad hoc staffs will be recruited, and we've seen that the budget for the census that was supposed to happen this year is on the high side. Is there a possibility of having some form of volunteerism, and how will it enable the process in terms of credibility?
Volunteerism is key. To what extent the National Population Commission want to use volunteer is beyond the scope of our discussion here. But I think when people volunteer in terms of certain things, then the funding become easily manageable. But census generally, globally, they are a very expensive venture, but it's something that must be done. But volunteers can be used. Civil society organization can lend credence in terms of creating baseline studies at a cheaper rate or even free through volunteerism efforts. Philanthropists as well, who don't have political colorations, can equally put some funding. And I do know that the National Population Commission equally have funding from development partner, multilateral agencies to support certain things towards enumeration.
How do we bring in religious leaders to correct this sentiment, religious sentiment? Because whether you like it or not, perhaps in the next election, it's still going to play out if something is not done. How do we tackle this, you know, with the role of religious leaders, traditional leaders? Because the homegrown solution now, it's important. The solution, the level of participation has to be local.
I think the National Orientation Agency has a big responsibility in this respect. And I think they have offices in over 700 something local government across the country. To what extent do we use those staff in the local government to have a kind of collaboration, a partnership with community leaders, traditional leaders, religious leaders, so that they're able to talk to their subjects or their communities to participate in the enumeration. And what is important, they need to drum into them the importance of this enumeration, that this enumeration will enhance the level of schools that will be provided in the community, the level of health centers, the level of local roads that will be built in those communities, even the ability from their produce to get from the farm gate into the market are equally important when they are properly counted.
I like to always use the election as a comparison for the census, because these are tools for national development. In the case of election, you have election observers. Is it possible to have census observers towards ensuring transparency? And how would that come with public participation?
That's a good initiative. I think we can exploit that as a way of authenticating the viability and the reliability of those data, and to what extent would the collation officer adhere to the laid down procedure for the enumeration processes.
In cases or situations where you have political interference, who should tackle that? Because you have people in power, funding this commission, providing the resources. What role can citizens play? Because we're talking about public participation now. What role can they play to ensure that they also do their bit to reduce political interference?
I think it's citizen diplomacy, citizens engagement, and in addition to that, communities must own the process, that if they are being counted, is beyond political reasons, that it will benefit them. So we still go back to the earlier question of education. Education creates awareness, and once people are aware, they become more sensitive to certain issues, and that census is critical to development in the community, and it has a direct relationship with the infrastructure that they will enjoy from those communities. Once they have this kind of mindset, then the participation will improve over a period of time. But political interference is a subtle diplomacy. It's not something that is even in the open. So how people will manipulate some of those things. And when I talk about machine and artificial intelligence and IT, we'll be able to bring out certain double counting that people try to manipulate. So technology will enable it better, but we need to educate people even before the census take place, during and after.
Thank you very much, Sam Uruji, for being with us on the discussion. We've looked at political interference in ethnic settlement as it affects census, and we've also talked about awareness and public participation. These are very key issues when you talk about having a credible census. And once again, thank you for being on the show with us.
My pleasure, Blessing and Femi.
Our exchange continues after this break. To stay tuned.
On social media, many Nigerian young companies were celebrating, wow, we raised Series C, we raised Series D. And anytime they raised these monies, everybody hailed them. But what was behind it? What is behind every raise is that the entrepreneur founder is diluted significantly. We had a very interesting session, and in one of the sessions, there was a role play about a case study on CWG PLC, which is a company that I founded. And the case was written by Columbia Business School to discuss a point about venturing, about entrepreneurship, and about funding for the enterprise. And the case ended on the question, should Austin Okere take the venture capital investment or should he reject it? Just a little bit of background. So this is a company, CWG, in 2005 that was doing very well. It was riding on the back of the Y2K that just happened at the turn of the century, was riding on the back of the telecom boom, that happened immediately after the civilian government of OBJ and GSM was launched, was riding on the back of the bank consolidation in 2005 that was done by Governor Soludo. And in each of these booms, CWG had positioned and taken good advantage. So this is not a company that was in dire need of cash or was desperate in 2005. But we had a plan to list our shares on the stock market, and we thought that the best way to do it was to first do either a private placement or, better still, to do a venture capital fundraise so that they will bring discipline into our operations, governance, strengthen our governance, and of course, bring more technical knowledge. And if people saw that this company was invested in you, probably it will make the listing on the stock exchange more attractive. The issue here is at what price? And I remember that I've discussed something similar on this on social media, where many Nigerian young companies were celebrating, wow, we raised Series C, we raised Series D. And anytime they raised these monies, everybody hailed them. But what was behind it? What is behind every raise is that the entrepreneur founder is diluted significantly. So if I use CWG as a case study, the case that was written by Columbia was that there was an offer of $8 million for 25% of the company, putting the valuation post at $32 million. Make no mistake, the Treasury bill's interest rate is 15% sometimes. Now, if someone is going to bring his money to invest in your company, he's looking for way more than that 15%, given that there's a high risk that his money will not come back. And the rule of thumb is that they're looking for 3 times what they brought in within 5 years. So in our case, they were going to be asking for $24 million within 5 years, or you list and give them a liquidity event or an exit. You have to check very well that this $8 million that you're taking in, you can do business in such a way that the value of the company can cough out $24 million in 5 years, regardless of exchange loss. Here is where it gets complicated. So you receive $8 million, which is converted to you in Naira. 2005 probably was about 130. Now, whether the Naira suffers devaluation or not, you're going to pay that $8 million. Now, paying $8 million, 5 years later, where the Naira is maybe 250 or 260, whilst you are generating your revenue in Naira, becomes almost impossible. And if the venture capital firm then has to take assets because you can't pay, he will end up owning, of course, a big chunk of your company, nothing at all. You begin to look like a management staff in the company you founded. So in our own case, we held out and we didn't take the money. And in 2009, when we took a subsequent one, the company was valued at $55 million, plus that there'd been an exchange loss. So the company was valued much more than the $32 million, and plus the fact that in Naira terms, they would have owned more of our company. My point being, don't sell your seed. Rather, till your seeds, let it grow into a fruit, and sell at the fruit, because the fruit is plentiful. A lot of our startups rush out to sell their seed, and they sell it cheap. To complete that story, we actually then listed the company in 2013 for $90 million. Now, I did a rough calculation. If we were in dire need of money and we borrowed $8 million at an interest rate of 20%, at that time Naira, we'll be returning Naira money, and we'll be returning something like, even if you take 100%, we'll be returning another $8 million in 5 years' time. But given that the company's valuation had gone to $55 million in that time, 2009, when the second PE company invested, we would have been better off taking the debt, because we'll be returning an extra $8 million, rather than 8 times 3, which is 24, that would have had to give $24 million that would have had to pay the VC company if we are taking the money at that time. So the delta is huge in terms of debt versus equity. So the point is, at some point in time, equity seems cheap, deceptively, but debt is cheaper. Especially at the early stages, what you have is a seed. You don't sell your seed. Have patience, hone it, bootstrap it, take debt to finance specific deals, makes you disciplined, and then when you have your fruit, you can then invite investors to come and you make more, and you don't lose a huge percentage of your company. You actually do still own a huge percentage of your company. Be patient. Don't rush out to collect funds and celebrate it. You will have to pay back. Thank you.
As far as the early exchange is concerned, our obligation is to having the right conversation with the right person and at the right time. And we are glad you're joining us at this time once again to have the right conversation. Our obligation is to inform and educate you. And we'll be looking at census as a tool for national planning. Now, to add more flesh to the discussion, to make it robust and bigger, we're being joined by Ida Hoser. It's always a pleasure having you join us on Early Exchange, Ida Hoser.
My pleasure to be here, at least to contribute our little quota to the national discourse and conversation.
That's great.
Yeah.
So let's look at the issue of public awareness. Earlier we had some who made an input and talked about his assessment. Now let's start with your own assessment of the level of public awareness and participation when it comes to census activity in Nigeria.
Well, I think in terms of public awareness, it's also correlated to the level of literacy that is in society. You live in a society where a lot of people are terribly illiterate, and it's difficult really to understand some basic issues. And that's why it's easy for political actors to hijack the systems and manipulate the way people perceive some certain things. You see, this look funny. I was looking at one short video the other day, and when people were doing these mobile protests, and then they were asking somebody, "Why are you wearing black?" He said, "Is that Mohbad now that died?" They say, "Who is Mohbad?" He said, "One Calabar boy that was working for his master, and then, you know, the master killed him." And so, see, this is the level of literacy in the environment that people really don't have full picture, because we have weaponized illiteracy and access to education in Nigeria. And so this is very critical. And this is what people are doing. So you go to a community to tell them and say, you see, this thing that is coming, you see, the more we are, the more we can get money from government. And then, of course, they are prone to manipulation and the rest of it. So I think we need to really, like Sama said earlier, see how we can engage very relevant stakeholders to speak to some of these national issues. We need the churches and the mosque to educate and enlighten its members on the significance and the importance of national data as it relates to planning and efficient and effective use and allocation of resources. So we need to do more. Yes, of course, we can talk about National Orientation Agency, but we also know the limit to which these people can get to. Not everybody have access to radio, not everybody have access to television, and even in some places where people have access to television, of course, there must also be language constraint and barrier that these have to be translated into several and multi-ethnic languages because of the way Nigerian is structured. Now, this is a big challenge that the nation faces. So I think it's actually better to engage with stakeholders, traditional rulers who are very close to the community, themselves being first enlightened, so that, of course, again, they don't carry misperception to the community. That this thing is beyond just resource allocation, it's beyond political representation, like I said earlier. It's just about us having a clear data of who we are, where we live, and so that, of course, even those who are going to intervene, development agencies and the rest of them, can actually take this data, even for research purposes, for sociologists, psychologists, to be able to look at our data and be able to really plan and also project theories that can explain some of our behavior. This is important. So we must take it beyond politics and get to the grassroots to let people really understand the relevance so that they themselves can come out. You know, I spoke earlier on about the way people saw it pre-independence. as only a means for taxation. And so when government says they want to do enumeration, what comes to the mind of the average man is that they want to collect taxes. So we must also let them understand that it is beyond tax collection. There are so much that come with accurate data for nation. Like they say today, data is life.
Okay, before we move into detail, we've talked about misconceptions. Where the misconceptions are not corrected or are unable to be corrected, what are the likely effects?
Yeah, this is what it is. If you tell people something that is wrong, of course their decisions will be based on the information they have. It's simple. And I can tell you that decisions cannot be right. You know, like they say in computer system, it's garbage in, garbage out. So it's the information that people have that will determine the outcome and the quality of their decisions. Now, if people have very poor information, then of course be sure that the decision that's going to be taken is going to be very poor. So if we don't want poor decision in terms of participation, in terms of supporting the credibility and the transparency of the system, then of course we must put in their domain the complete and adequate information that will enable them to actually judge and see census as a tool for national development rather than a punitive or a rewarding tool.
There seems to be this, large distrust between the people and the government in a situation whereby government comes up with a policy or any directive. There's always this distrust from the angle of the citizens. Now, let's bring this to census. Taking, for instance, an announcement is being made now, there's going to be census next week, next month. This will also spring up. How do we correct the narrative whereby virtually every interaction between the citizens and the government is laced with distrust?
Well, I think, again, it's really more about how government communicates itself. That's critically important here. You see, there's something they say in my village. If somebody who is known to say the truth often lies against you, it's difficult for you to really get out of it, because everybody is going to see it as true. Now, if somebody who is also reputed for lying tells the truth, it will be very difficult for people to believe. Because, of course, it's not to be saying the truth. People will not wait for it to happen before they will accept the truth. And I think this is where government communication becomes very fundamental. And for me, it's also very important, even especially for this regime. Because so far, so good, we are seeing some retractions, which is not good, and they are too early. Because this creates a whole lot of disbelief. If you say something today and tomorrow you are trying to correct it and you are manipulating it, it will be difficult for people to believe you. So this is where, for us, when we are going to communicate, like they say, if you're going to equity, your hands must be very clean. Let's tell people things the way they are. And once people can see that government is talking and they are meaning what they say, and they are saying what they mean, then of course the level of trust in the system can increase. But where you see aides to government rush to the press, give misinformation, this creates room for support stress in a political system. And I think this is where we need to really train those who speak for government to know how to engage with their stakeholders. It's very important. This is very, very important. And you can imagine that you are coming to tell people this is what it is, and what they are saying is different from what you have said. So I think we need to build trust in the system. Government needs to communicate the things the way they are. Let people know. Don't give people false hope. You know, some people want to see themselves to see, oh, we are doing well, I'm active. Yes, your work will speak for you. So this is the issue where you see, I keep emphasizing this fact, you over-promise and under-deliver. So people should be able to learn to see things the way they are. And I think this is where public officers need to really be cautious in dealing with people. Because people just look a record to history and say, well, yesterday he said a lie. Today he said another lie. So when he's going to say something tomorrow, it's going to be likely another lie. And this is why you see people cannot even believe even the very good policy government pursues, because when people come to the public and tell you one thing, so this is the issue. It should be intentional with the government. You can imagine as the last regime was going and we say, oh, Nigerian air has been born. After a long while, some of us were so happy. And weeks after, we are still talking about the agreement between Ethiopia and Nigerian airline is still being stalled. So these are issues, and this creates a whole lot of distrust between government and its citizens. And I think if government comes open to the air and tell people what it is, citizens are likely to believe. I'll give you one example from India. You see, when Indians were going to remove their subsidy, they took a very fundamental step. And they went to their citizens and said, this is the position of government. This is what we can do. If we continue with this subsidy, this is what you will get. If you remove it, this is what you are going to likely get. But before they got to that point, they had concluded their national identification program, which of course cost India about $1 billion US to number about 1.3 billion people in India. And every Indian had that card. So they were able to isolate the real poor people in society and know where they were. And they came at a figure of about 300 million people who were real poor Indians. And what government decided to do was to say, well, this very poor Indian who had no access to bank account and these things, government was going to create bank account for them based on the data captured. So those bank accounts were created. And government promised the people that what government was spending monthly to fund citizen subsidy, in order to create efficiency in that system, the excess of the subsidized product will be paid by government directly to these very poor people's accounts. And so as money started to hit the poor people account, the new government was serious about the business. And so all the people that had been taking advantage of the poor people to perpetuate the subsidy regime in India had no excuse, because the people were directly getting money and alert from government. So they could not really use them as an excuse. And then, of course, Indians were able to phase out subsidy in their energy distribution. But today, look at it. India is supplying electricity to about 4 of its neighbors. And they are making huge revenue from it. And I think the cleaning of the system is vital and important for us. And when government is speaking to issues and the citizens are told exactly the situation and the position without raising hope unnecessarily, people will begin to adjust and know that this person means what he's saying, and then, of course, they will deal with him based on facts.
All right, let's come to the issue of data, using data to plan. At the moment, Nigeria still uses the data from the 2006 census to plan, and estimations given most times by the World Bank. So what is the effect of planning with an outdated data?
Well, I think, yeah, like what every other nation do is you do a census and you look at the average between the last you did and the one you did, you can be able to estimate the percentage of increase. So what we have done in the last 17 years is actually to use at the figure of 2006 to estimate and project what our population likely going to be, using the average of between 2.5% increase and 3.3% increase, depending on the factors that you are looking at. So that's why you have various degree of census. So some people say it's 116, some people say 1110. depending on what percentage increase you're likely to use. Now, what this means is that you don't know your actuals. So everything is based on estimation. So in terms of the allocation of resources, you will not be able to really determine where to put your money. For example, you may think that the biggest challenge you have is out of school children. And then you are channeling the whole of your resources to deal with the problem of out of school children. Whereas in terms of demographic, what you really have as a problem is aging. You see? So you see, you will be moving resource to the wrong direction. So this is why it is important to have data that are near accurate. Of course, you may not be able to have exactly accurate data, but at least you have something that is closer to accurate. And then, of course, on the basis of this, you will be able to say for certainty what number of men we have, what number of women are in this society, what number of boys we have who are under 18, who are under 15. So we will be able to plan for this various segment. Where do they live? Are they in the urban area? Are they in the rural sector? So that spatial distribution, you are able to also account for it. So that if you are moving primary health care to the rural area, and you are building more in the rural area, whereas the people have since moved to the urban center, the resource you have deployed to the rural will be wasted. I keep using the example of, for example, secondary school in my village. When we were there those days, we had a class A to F in morning session, and you have F to I in evening session. School was full. Each class, a minimum of 45 people in the class. So you can estimate what number it is. But that whole school today is not up to 100 people going there. So when you look at it, you see in that kind of environment, this village has a secondary school. They have 3 teachers. They have 100 people. This village have 20 people, 2 teachers. Waste of resource. So if you know where your people are, know the number of children that are in that place, you can sit down at the education board, for example, and determine whether to manage resources to get better results than focus on community as it were with over-bloated figure. And then you are putting wrong resource at the wrong place.
Let's focus on the root of the problem. Let's look critically. What are the factors responsible for this inability to conduct census over the years? We had one in 1962, and one will expect that, there's a need to build on that, or will have built on that over the years. Talk to us about some of these challenges and these difficulties.
I think it's really not a challenge for me as a person, just my perspective and view. And I take the line of reasoning of late Professor Claude Ake, God bless his soul, who spoke about the politicization of everything in Nigeria. And I think the real problem is that the politics in Nigeria has been over-politicized. Development in Nigeria, had been over-politicized over the years. This is the real basic issues. Other issue, costs associated, talk about personnel, all these are just, ancillary issues or secondary issues. The real critical challenge here is the fact that everybody who gets in on the top is only thinking about what they are going to use the data for. And the whole idea is because of what you call politics. You remember, even in that 2006, when we were talking about national identification, why census was going on, to use them pari passu, some very big powers then were asking fundamental question. What will the data be used for? Are they going to use it for election? And once, of course, the answer came that, look, if we have right census and we have good identification system, we can actually use it for election. Politicians bungled the process. And that's why up to date, we cannot even conduct census. We cannot do proper identification of our citizens. Whereas elsewhere, these things are within the beck and call of anybody. If a child is born in the UAE today, that child has a national ID card. Same is true for America. Because these are already within the facilities. So you don't really need to be going around every year to update this data. But unfortunately, we have not been able to synchronize this. You can imagine that if a child is born today in Nigeria, and of course, National Identification Scheme captures it, automatically it's updated at the census data bank. Automatic. So we will have very, very near accurate data. But unfortunately, because of some of these considerations, the agencies working themselves in silos, where chief executives of certain parastatal agencies have become a mini god, so to speak, and pursuing their own parochial vision and goal at cross purposes with the real essence of the business of government, which is the welfare of citizens, you will find that it will be difficult for you to really get at data that can be meaningful and realistic.
Now, in gathering data that will be meaningful and realistic, the NPC talked about using technology, digitalizing the process. What kind of technology will be needed to have a credible and meaningful data in Nigeria?
Well, I think NPC had tried really to see how to really modernize the collection of data, especially in the one that we're expecting to happen anytime soon. They produced their own part, for example, that will enhance the capture of this data. Of course, biometrics is being introduced. Facial recognition technology is being reintroduced. And this is to ensure that, of course, every data that is captured is authentic. Now, of course, because you know that the biometric system can only accept your thumbprint once, and that automatically will weed out, you know, people that are not captured. But the real big question here is the fact that, of course, also again, look at the access that we'll have to electricity, access to internet, and all of that thing. How are we going to be able to grapple with the challenge of really capturing people at the rural area? And here, of course, you see, they're also proposing a hybrid between real-time digital data and some manual form. And this is where the problem always comes in. We see this happen in our elections. And this is why people are asking. INEC promises us so much during the election, but this hybrid system bungled the entire system. So this is the challenge that NPC will likely face. But I think that for the purpose of accountability and transparency, it will be proper that after the whole exercise, they need to actually do a forensic audit on the data itself is necessary, so that an independent body will be able to take the entire data and clean it out to be sure that every information that is in that system corresponds with both facial data, biometric data, and of course the physical structural data that is captured by the enumerators. So this is important. Then of course the use of GIS, spatial technology, satellite images, to be able to actually see, if you say you have gone to a particular region and you saw 20 houses in that place, of course we can correspond that with satellite images to be sure that those 20 houses were actually there. So all these things can actually be used to validate and make sure that data that is actually collected are near accurate.
All right, let's take a breather now. When we return, we'll continue our conversation on the issue of census as a tool for national planning. Stay with us. All right, it's the early exchange and the conversation is getting better, it's getting bigger. I like saying that because that's our hallmark here. And we still have Idauza here with us. We've been looking at census as tool for national planning, and precisely we're looking at the impact of technology and data. Idauza, always a pleasure having you here on Early Exchange.
My pleasure to be here always.
All right. As a follow-up to our earlier discussion, census data over the years have shown that, Nigeria has been experiencing population growth. Most importantly, you see that more people reside in the urban areas according to this data and the survey. Talk to us about the impact of this on national planning and development.
Well, I think it's a real big problem as we speak. It's just that somehow, maybe because we have not had real hard fact or data to this extent, a lot of people really don't know the significance of what we're talking about. Now, when you compare to the 1980s, 1970s, you find that the population living in the urban center were about 15% compared to what you have today, where almost about 65% of our population, according to some data, actually live in the urban center. Now, what this portends for the nation is that there's a stress put on the facilities that are put on the urban centers. And because of the overpopulation in the urban center, so the struggle for amenities, infrastructure, is a huge problem. And you have with attendant waste challenge and management that comes with urban centers. And I think this is a big challenge. And I think that really need to be able to harvest the real hard data so we really know the number of people who are living in the urban center and see what incentives that can be created in the rural area so that there can be some backward integrations into the rural area. People moving from the urban centers and then coming to the rural area. This is important because if you see some of the facilities you have in the rural area, I just mentioned the schools, for example, in my own local government, it's almost a waste. But whereas when you come to the urban center, you're seeing overpopulation. So I think that a whole lot of attention should focus on the rural area so that people can begin to reintegrate or go back to the rural communities and have better life and good life than the choked kind of life that you see in the urban center today.
Now, after data is collected during census exercise, utilization of the data is another challenge. How do we ensure that the data collected is well utilized, and to what sectors do we need to begin to utilize this data for planning?
You have a situation where it's almost peculiar, around this climb, where you have a situation where certain things are in place, but when it comes to the implementation, it becomes a challenge. And I think it's still the same issue. So let's allow Idauza to react.
It's not enough to have the new numbers.
Yeah.
Now, if we have the new numbers, how do we begin to use that to plan? And what sectors would need to begin to utilize that data?
You see, I think this is where, of course, the innovation that MPC has been introduced to the current census will be real of great advantage, because we're going to have a real-time data analysis on the dashboard. That a mere look at the dashboard alone, you will be able to see where the data are in terms of their demographic spread and configurations. So this will help. The one you did before, which are manual, of course, issues with data loss. Trying to manually collate this thing become really very difficult. Now, with this technology introduced, you are able to actually accurately capture the data real time. And if this is actually done well, as the enumeration is going on, you can actually go on the website of MPC and you will be able to see what is the data in your area by age classification, by social class, by gender, and all the other demographic indicators. you will be able to see real life. And that helps you to begin to think. For example, you know the number of people who are graduates in your area. You know the number of people who have just secondary education. So that if you're going to be planning, you know, is it more tertiary education you need, or more secondary education you need, or more primary education you need? All these things will happen. Now you see there's a whole lot of massive push on girls' child education. The data will show it. Whether there's actually a disparity between the girl child education and the boy child education. So it will help the nation to know where to focus on and put the conversation on. And so people who want to actually run NGO, you may discover that there may be more boys out of school than girls out of school. And therefore, new NGOs begin to cater for those numbers. This is where accurate data become a life for every nation. So if we have it, it will help us to be able to plan our resources. Look at it. Access to health, for example. You see the last Nigerian Bureau for Statistics report that shows that over 133 million are dimensionally poor. Now, if you look at the indicators that are used, is to say, oh, how many people have access to school, have access to education, have access to good health system. All these things came together to what, of course, MBS said is dimensional poverty. Now, you will be able to see really in real time how many people are dimensionally poor in terms of health, access to good road, access to good public water, access to electricity, access to healthcare systems. So we will know where they are. And then, of course, government can begin to focus in areas where there are gaps. And of course, this will no longer spur controversy because numbers will not lie. It will no longer be seen as if a government is deliberately favoring one ethnic group to the other. Because everybody can see the national data and really see where there are problems that needs government interventions. And once you can determine where these problems are that needs national intervention, now you will be able to explain resource allocation without suspicion.
There's this projection that come year 2050, the population of Nigeria might likely increase to 450 million. What kind of preparation is needed to be able to manage this kind of, if I may use the word, population explosion? What kind of data research, what kind of analysis, what kind of preparation will be needed in order to be able to manage this consistent sign of growth?
Well, I think a whole lot is needed in this area. You know, my professor at the University of Lagos those days, when he was talking to us about international economies, used to say to us that in 1974, when he has his fourth child, that the population of Nigeria was already too much because our economy or our GDP really could not support 4 people in a family as far as 1974. Now you can imagine what the figures are as we speak. And you see, that was the situation in which China was some years ago, that they had to deliberately formulate population control mechanism. Of course, it has its positive, it also has its negative, because as we speak now, China is one of the countries in the world whose population is going down rather than going up. And that's why you see India has overtaken China in terms of the size of population. So they're having to deal with problem with aging now. Now they are trying to motivate young people to start to marry and have children. And of course, that will take a whole lot of time to change. So these are the things you see. If you see that your GDP is growing at an arithmetic progression and your population is growing at a geometric proportion, now there's a disincentive here, because your GDP will not be able to accommodate or take care of your population that is growing faster. And this is the problem that Nigeria really faces. Now, in terms of even land access, it will become a more problem. The last time we were speaking about, urban migration. You talk about a lot of people who are moving away from the north as a result of desertification, trying to come into the southern belts of Nigeria, and that is creating a whole lot of tension, which of course we call the farmer header crisis. Now this migration pattern will continue, because when people don't have access to land or livable land, what do? They will be looking for where to get into to get land, and that will bring original communities in conflict with migrants, which likely is going to take us back to the Stone Ages, where there were intertribal wars. Now, in order to avoid this kind of a trend, and I think national planners need to begin to see how we can prepare for this eventuality that is real going to happen. For me, it's a time bomb. The way we use land today has to change. The way we practice agriculture today has to change. Rather than grow horizontally, Nigeria must deliberately grow vertically, because that's the only way to go. And that is the only way to make provision for over 230 million people that will be born between now and then.
Okay, let's take a step back to technology. Now, when data has been collected using different technological means, biometrics and all, one thing that people sometimes worry is the privacy and the security of this data. Now, how do we ensure, not just for census purpose, but we know that at different points data has been captured, how do we ensure the privacy of the data collected and the security of it as well?
And I think this is where, for example, the use of technology is also a plus, because the system is encrypted, and because it's encrypted, real third party can't see those data, except those who have the right and access to the database. So data security will be guaranteed, really, because you are seeing it, you just put in your thing, and it's encrypted at the other end. The data is plugged in. Even the enumerator cannot carry all the data in his head. So the system is the one that is banking. It's only people who have access to the data bank that can compromise that system. And I think a lot will need to be done in that regard, so that those who manage our critical national assets, including data, do not compromise it. Do not give it out to people who don't need it or who may use it for vicious purpose, but that the right people who need to have access to this data for the purpose of planning are the ones that have clear access to it.
My question has two legs. The first one is part of the reason for having census data is to facilitate national planning and allocation of resources. Now, with what we have now, it shows the allocation of resources is defective with the survey data from the present, census figures and the statistics we've had over the years. The second leg to it is, will you advise that the federal government should embark on another exercise, soonest, maybe in the next 1 year, looking at the present economic realities vis-a-vis the fact that it's also important for economic planning and allocation of resources?
Well, I think at this point in our national life, we need to do a baseline census that can serve us in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years. It's important. It is good that we capture our data rightly. Inspite the economic realities. Oh yes, it is important. Okay. It is important because, you see, it's foundational to national development. Let us really know for the first time how many numbers that we are. Let's know where we live. Let's be able to estimate, as it were, our infrastructure deficit. You see, because there's a correlate between the figures we're currently using and the authenticity of the figures that is generating those numbers. Now, if you don't do this right, you cannot plan well. even where people are having agitation. It's going to solve a lot of problems for us as a nation in terms of reallocation of basic national infrastructure, in terms of constructing new infrastructure to actually say, if I'm going to put something here, do we really, is it economically viable? Even in setting of economic activities, it will help even people who are making products as private sector to be able to distribute efficiently. We know the number of people who are driving cars, for example, in the rural area, and we can determine the quantum of petrol, for example, that is consumed, or kerosene that is used in those areas. These are fundamentals, and this is why this regime must prioritize this census. And once we can capture it right, a lot of things will go right, even including our elections.
Talking about things going right, and you just mentioned election. Now, one of the reasons people try to influence the data that they submit or data collected during census is because of the allocation of economic resources and development that may come to their region using those data. Now, what is to be corrected in this regard? We know that there is diversity in Nigeria. That cannot change, or that will not change. And we know that there will always be political interest. These two are things that are not going to change tomorrow. But what do we do about it to limit or to reduce the rate at which people will need to manipulate results or try to interfere with the process because of what they will gain from it in terms of revenue allocation and economic development that will be drawn to their area?
You see, Blessing, I don't see that as a fear or worry at all. For some of us who are students of society, we have since graduated from ballot snatching to vote buying. Why do you think that happened? Because we have integrated technology into the electoral process. That snatching a ballot box does not equal to electoral victory. You see, technology solves this problem. It takes it naturally away, because if you have technology that's working real time, especially the use of biometrics in this data collection, what will the politician profit, for example, in trying to put a fingerprint that the system will reject? It will naturally reduce those human interference and political pressure. That's my honest view. Because in the 1979 election, I remember how many thumbprints that were done in the room and the election is announced. But no, that's not possible with the BVAS technology, that before you have to vote, you have to be accredited. Your thumbprint has to show that you actually registered. And that's the area where I spoke to the hybrid, where people are making excuses for places where technology is not operating. You know, I was speaking to one of our friends, Professor Ford in Rwanda about 2 days ago, and he was asking me some basic question that even in Rwanda they have gone beyond some of all these issues, that a USSD code can solve a lot of problems without necessarily have to have internet access. And I think we must get into that point where going forward we're not just going to be relying on this enumeration, that even Nigerian Population Commission should be able to integrate into their system where people can remotely register and authenticate their identity on the system. And that will reduce cost in the longer run. So we need to invest in this process and see how we can ensure that technology remove all human interferences, and then we can have a very clean data that the nation can plan with.
So in a situation where there's a common poll or a common unit where people go to have their data captured, would it be as effective as when the enumerators go to their houses? Because then it will be left to their discretion, except there's a penalty attached to it.
You see, it's just to put a little incentive into it. Take for example, JAMB came with a process. If you don't have national identification, you can't register JAMB. Then forget it at your peril. It's either you want to go to university or you don't want to go to the university. If this become a precondition, for example, to enroll in a primary school, for example, people will naturally do it. So you just need to create the incentive, the right incentive, put it in place. People will work to go and capture data. Because if you don't have access to national resource, nobody will tell you to go and do it. If it becomes, for example, if you don't have your census number or your national ID card number, you cannot vote. In short, politicians will help those who don't have access to go and register because they need their vote. So put incentive around it. It may not necessarily have to be money. And this drives people to naturally submit to it. You see, because until we really have real-time data, our national discourse cannot start. Because this is where the problem is. You remember in 2006, after the census, national census, the figure between Lagos and Kano put Kano a little above Lagos. And Lagos State did their own internal census and came up with a new figure of over 20 million against the 15 million that was in Kano. You see, this creates a room for national suspicion because the data are not known. Now, what you do is that once you now have this adequate data, we will know where the population really is. We cannot determine and say, okay, for equity purpose, for the principle of proportionality, we can determine now where to put our resource and how to allocate this resource without offending any side of the subnationals in our federation.
All right, what a way to wrap up this discussion. I feel like you should go on and on and on because it's been quite educative, but you know, time is not on our side. Thank you for your submission on Early Exchange this morning.
Always my pleasure to be here.
Blessing?
Yes, he mentioned that until we get the issue of census right, national discourse cannot continue.
That's
yes,
true.
we've gotten the issue right on this table. It is for those in the appropriate quarters now to take it further. So the national discourse will continue tomorrow. Remember, it's the pre-independence series this week as Nigeria prepares to mark its independence anniversary. I am Blessing Aiche, and it's a wrap on the show today. Femi.
Don't forget, Business Insight comes up next. I'm Femi Ayodele. Have a nice time.